Hello, and thank you for watching this presentation by the American Iris Society. Please support the organization by becoming a member. Go to irises.org and click on Join. Thank you.
Welcome everyone to the 38th webinar of the American Iris Society. And tonight's webinar is on the history of Ensata Gardens. But before we get into the webinar, I would like to introduce Patrick Spence, who is from Lake Stevens, Washington, and the King County Iris Society. And I'd like to tell you that the King County Iris Society and the American Iris Society is putting this webinar on in conjunction with each other. And Patrick is a past president of both the Society for Siberian Irises and the Society for Japanese Irises. And he is going to be introducing our speaker for tonight. Patrick.
I envisioned this program and asked John to do it for the King County Iris Society. So welcome everyone to the April meeting of the King County Iris Society. And I'd like you to know that I started growing irises 19 years ago, and almost from the beginning, I met Bob and John here at Ensata Gardens, and for all that time, they have been nothing but the best of friends, great mentors, and good travel companions. And I am absolutely certain this is going to be a great program and that you're going to enjoy every second of it. So without further ado, here's John Coble.
Brenda, this is my first Zoom presentation. I've only watched two of them because I have a hard time getting onto Zoom and how to get it onto my computer. So I hope you bear with me, and we're going to do the best we can. Well, the history, because Ensata Gardens is going to be retiring at the end of this year. This is going to be our last year with the nursery. So it's time to have a little history. But our business has started, 50 some years ago. And we were going to start clear back at 1970 and start there and go forward. Because our first business of stained glass has to do a lot with iris also. We put out our first price list in 1985. It was a mimeograph sheet. And I think some of you are old enough to remember what a mimeograph sheet looks like. This we think will be we're pretty sure this is going to be our last year. Enough 25 or 40 years in business. We decided to specialize in Japanese iris. Like anybody who sees them for the first time, like we did, wow. And we didn't even know what they were. We didn't even know that they were an iris. But we got hooked. And we went into a whole new business, changed our lives. We started with stained glass. Well, we started before that in college. But once we couldn't get jobs, we decided we had to take up one of our hobbies and get serious about it. So we started hybridizing iris before we grew iris. And in fact, I ordered a Schreiner's catalog, found them in a magazine somewhere, so I could have pictures of iris. So I really knew how to make iris in the correct colors and what they really existed like. And then after 25 years, the stained glass business slowed up. There was a recession in the late 80s. Business went off and we had to lay off some employees. In the meantime, we met such a thing as an iris garden, and the stained glass business and the iris corp were coordinated for about almost 10 years when we went full-time in iris and no longer doing any stained glass. After the stained glass studios closed, we had time to make a lampshade for ourselves instead of just the customers. Tonight I'm sitting underneath this 28-inch Tiffany laburnum design, which I made in a wisteria pattern because we had wallpapered this dining room with wisteria wallpaper. And I think the lamp goes good with a base of blue Siberians. Well, it all started back in 1970 at Purdue University. Bob Bauer went to Purdue after he got his doctorate at Northwestern University, couldn't get a job, so he got a postdoctorate research grant there. I had been teaching school for 2 years, and I went back to Purdue to get my master's degree in wildlife biology. The assistant dean of men found a house out in the country so that we could rent and share. After 40 years, Bob's chemistry changed. My wildlife biology changed. And now I sign my emails this way. It's been 54 years. After Purdue, there were no jobs available in the 1970, 71, 72. So Bob got another postdoctorate research grant at the University of Illinois. And me, with my master's degree, I went along and drove taxi cab in Champaign-Urbana. Let me tell you, there's no quicker way to learn the streets than get that job. We visited friends back in Michigan. We had been collecting antiques when we were in college. They were cheaper than furniture, even used furniture. A lot of people didn't want antiques, so we could supply a small house with antiques. And we were at a friend's house, and there was a stained glass lampshade like this. And I said, oh, that would be nice. But we couldn't afford $600 probably at that time at an antique shop. Well, Bob Bauer looked underneath the shade, looked around, and said, oh, I can make one of those. And he did. He figured out how to make the pattern and everything. So from 1972 to about 1990, we had a stained glass studios. We had to get serious about something. And that fruit border we started out looking at, we ended up making 29 of those, 26-inch fruit border, and also 12 smaller shades, 20-inch fruit border. Mainly antique shops and different kinds of shops like that were buying these products. I started out making a simple one, lots of easy cut squares, rectangles. Bob's a little bit different than that. He started out making something much better, much bigger. He didn't want to go simple. So we made a 26-inch diameter hanging sunflower. Later on, I'll show you how he made the base cap for a sunflower lampshade, carved it in clay, made a plaster casting, and then we cast them in bronze in the lost wax process. So the shade ended up with a sunflower base cap and for a hanger, and the other one is for a table lamp that we made a 20-inch sunflower. The design is the back of a sunflower blossom. The sunflower was popular. It's our design. It was new. A62. That's the 62nd pattern we had made. They weren't all lampshades. Oh, some of them were just sun catchers, butterflies, dragonflies, whatever. This is the 26-inch sunflower, and we ended up making 29 of these during our 25 years. And that first sunflower lampshade, we didn't know what to do with it. We just made it. We put a black and white ad in the Antique Trader, probably about 1973, 74. And Alex Jordan, the owner of House on the Rock in Spring Green, Wisconsin, he just bought it. I don't know what it was. I don't know what it was, $600 maybe then. And so we delivered it to him. He had this big, he lived in a small apartment in Madison, Wisconsin. This House on the Rock is something he built and turned into a big tourist museum. And it was growing bigger and bigger and better and better. And in his apartment, he showed us this book he had on the lamps of Tiffany. And he was starting to leaf through it and show us some lampshades he would like to have. Well, we were new in the business. So we ended up buying this $200 book. The first $200 book we ever bought, but we thought we'd better get it. And we did. And he started ordering things. But he wanted them different than Tiffany's. This is a picture out of the book of Tiffany's 18-inch flowering lotus shade. Well, Mr. Jordan wanted them bigger. So we made a 25-inch diameter lotus for him to hang in his museum. Tiffany made a 26-inch hydrangea. Mr. Jordan wanted it bigger than that. So we made a 30-inch diameter hydrangea. I do remember when I was soldering the inside of this lampshade, it was like working in a bathtub. And when I hung it on the limb of a cherry tree to photograph it outside, it broke the limb of the cherry tree. The Tiffany Wisteria, the most famous lamp I think that the Tiffany Studios made in the 1920s. It's 18 inches in diameter, 2,000 pieces. That's not big enough for Mr. Jordan. He had big rooms and he just wants to wow people when they come to it. So he ordered, and we made two 25-inch diameter wisterias, each with 3,000 pieces. And I have proof that we made them. This is still in Champaign, Illinois, and it is a big project. The last one we made for him was a big, what we called mushroom lamp. It's called, just because of the shape. This is 40 inches tall with a 26-inch diameter shade. I said he wanted to wow people, and he did. I don't know how many thousands or hundreds of pieces this is, but and the bronze base and the arms that come up, Bob carved those, and we cast them in bronze to hold the shade and the base. And if you like this, you can go to the museum and get a postcard that he sells, or you can go on eBay and buy one, maybe for $10 or $12, a used one. In the background of this, you can see there's a 26-inch peony lampshade that we made for him. They're all signed Bauer-Coble Studios. They're in different sizes than what Tiffany made. There's a picture of what he called the piano room. I don't know how many rooms he has, close to 100. And you just go from one room to the other and just get wowed by everything. There's a collection of dolls, there's collections of everything. And he made musical instruments, mechanical musical instruments, and orchestras. You can go into a room and he has violins. He has a little orchestra, and all the instruments are laying on the chairs, and all of a sudden they start to play mechanically. No people. In this room, there's the 30-inch diameter fruit dome. Move to the middle, another 26-inch peony. And there in the back is hanging one of those 25-inch wisteria. Well, Mr. Jordan bought lamps from us, I don't know how many years, but we ended up making 48 lampshades for his museum. It's a big museum. It would take you 4 hours to go through it. But what an experience you'll have. In fact, we even say that Mr. Jordan bought the farm. And this is the farm he bought. We waited for this house for 3 years. It was in Michigan, Galesburg, Michigan, right outside Kalamazoo. And we knew it was there. We talked to the children. A 90-year-old lady lived here. They said they didn't want it, but they wanted mother to stay here as long as she could. So in 1975, we got a phone call. One of the daughters said, "Are you guys still interested in this house?" We said, "Sure." And they said, "Are you guys still ready to pay cash?" And we said, "Sure." Ha ha. We had a good attorney and he got us a 5-year land contract. The children were 68, 70, and 72. They didn't want a long mortgage or a long land contract. But Mr. Jordan ordered enough lampshades that we could pay off the land contract. Oh, by the way, the house comes on 80 acres and we were able to pay it off in 6 years. I can hear you giggling out there. This is John and Bob, their first year in the old new house, 1975. Oh, go ahead, about 20 years. Yes, we scratched paint, Bob and I, on scaffolding and such, scraped the red paint off and put on white trim. I remember painting the attic windows very clearly. I laid on my back and leaned out the window, scraped them, there's 4 of them, and then painted them white. When we moved to Michigan, the stained glass studio, we had to hire some employees. We had a special designer who, when he finished making this pattern, he said it was just perfect. We put out an ad for more employees and they came running. Wait a minute. We did not hire them, but we did take their black-eyed Susans and we made a lampshade of black-eyed Susans. And to sell lampshades, we had to have lamp bases. Nobody in the United States or Europe or anywhere was making bronze lamp bases. So Bob says, "Oh, I can do that." So he started carving in clay, transferring into plaster, and then making rubber molds, then wax, and then bronze casting. This is the pinyon pine base he made for 16-inch shades. The iris shade became our trademark. We wanted to excel in our own designs rather than just make Tiffany reproduction type shades. They were harder to sell. Everybody wanted Tiffany because that's what they knew. But we did have good reception to some of our own designs. This is the 20-inch iris. We made 20 of those in our 25 years history. That's on a 6-leaf base Bob designed and started casting in bronze. Then we discovered daylilies. Of course, these are not like the modern day ruffled ones, but they were easier to make than the modern day ruffled ones. The 20-inch daylily on a lily leaves base that Bob carved. We ended up making 15 of those. This is Bob back in Champaign when he started carving bases, patterns. This is like a Tiffany tree base, and it's carved as well as he could carve from photographs. We never had an original to take a pattern from or anything. So that's as close as we could get. Bob had quite a few pages around the studio. He was always sketching. He loved to sketch new ideas, new shapes and forms, and with the lamp bases. So he could start carving, and he uses clay or plastiline. That's an oil clay that doesn't dry out fast. And here he is carving the lily leaves base. And then you have to go through several steps if you know lost wax casting, making a plaster copy, and then making a plaster mold, a rubber mold, so you can make multiple copies in wax. And of course, you burn out the wax, and that's why it becomes called lost wax casting. We built a foundry, built a pole barn, built a foundry inside. when Bob puts his mind to something, he does it. And of course, we were casting bronze before we had video cameras, so this is the best I can do. We only had 4 people helping here on bronze casting day. Don't do it in the middle of the summer. It's so hot. This is the lamp base. And on the right, it's finished with a patina. Many, many hours of cleaning up the bronzes once they're cast. When you put the shade with the base, it makes a nice unit. And it sells much better than just putting it on any base. The cap on top is also a bronze copy of a daylily blossom. It takes hours and hours of working with the metal. The bronzes never did pay for themselves, but you had to have them for bases. Even in Tiffany's days, the bronze bases sometimes would cost just as much as a lampshade. 22-inch iris. That's a big one. We only made 9 of those. On what Bob carved was a celery leaf base, 4-footed celery leaf design. And then we made a big lamp base. Bob carved a new one just for the big 22-inch iris. So far, we've only made 4 of those. I think we have one in the basement that has not been finished yet, so maybe someday we'll have one of our own. The iris base has tall bearded iris carved around it, or shall I say bearded. The base cap for the shade actually turns out to be a Japanese iris base cap on top, 5 inches. That's, of course, after we discovered such a thing as a Japanese iris. We didn't know that at the time. Several designs of iris created. This is upside down hanger. I think probably 25, 26-inch diameter. This customer sent us pictures of the iris she wanted. So we had to find and work with those colors. Another big shade hanging 25-inch diameter iris. One of these was ordered and was sent to Germany. That was fun packing up. And another design of tall bearded iris. We only made a couple of these. But Mr. Jordan wasn't finished with us. I think in the same book with the lamps, or if not another book, he found the Tiffany's Four Seasons windows, which were made by Tiffany. I don't know the exact year, somewhere I would say around 1910 for a World's Fair exposition. And then after the exposition, they were placed into his house on Long Island. After his house burned, they were salvaged. At least the firemen did not go through them. The firemen did go through some of his windows. These were saved, and they were put in the Morse Gallery of Art in Winter Park, Florida. Yeah, like people on Long Island, Tiffany had a home down in Florida. Well, Mr. Jordan wanted a copy of these. Each one of these 4 windows is about 3 feet by 3 feet. So yes, put together, it's a 6 foot by 6 foot window, thousands of pieces, and many of them are 2 layers, if not 3 layers thick to get the depth. Well, we gave Mr. Jordan a price and he agreed. We just made it high enough to go take a trip to Florida and look at them in real life and take pictures of them so we could try to make a copy. So I made arrangements with an airlines, and I got a good deal on Anaconda Airlines, and I got my first jet ride. So I don't know how much later we made the 4 windows: spring, summer, fall, autumn, and winter. Finding the jewels was a chore. Only a few people had them. Only a few people made them. There were only a few glass studios when we started. And after we started in the business, more glass studios started up in Portland, Oregon, and in California, and in Pennsylvania. These are at the House on the Rock. And the one window, winter is signed, Bauer-Coble Studios, Galesburg, Michigan. Nobody knows where Galesburg, Michigan is. So some people went to Galesburg, Illinois, the famous one, and they looked for us there. April Fools. Some of you, maybe there's a few of you out there that can date this by the style of my bell-bottom breeches. You can see the size of some of these. The one over on the left is a Tiffany design of a dogwood or a magnolia and iris window. On the right are peacock windows from various studios. We made quite a few stained glass windows in peacocks. It was a popular design. These are at least 4 feet tall. I know that we made at least 2 copies of this design. I designed these. I remember the hollyhocks once we had the glass to make the blossoms. So getting the right glass was important in selecting to make the effects you wanted. The background glass, the hills and the skies are all 2 layers thick just to get the depth of field and the colors you wanted. And this is a copy of a Tiffany window. I don't know that we made it the same size as Tiffany's. Magnolia blossoms above iris. And these happen to be, just by coincidence, Japanese iris. And this is before we knew what they were. Later, we didn't realize what they were, and then try to realize how Tiffany would have known about them. And especially, well, that's artists' freedom to put early spring magnolias blooming with midsummer Japanese iris. But in the 1920s, Long Island hosted the largest Japanese iris nurseries in the United States. And I think Tiffany in his limousine was probably driven by these nurseries quite often, maybe every day to work. But the iris were growing on Long Island, and that's where Tiffany lived and worked. So it made quite a connection, especially when we were going from glass into Japanese iris. Boy said we were at the right place at the right time. With snowballs and wisteria,
Oh, you got muted, John. There you are.
okay. Tiffany had a lot of snowballs and wisterias around his home on Long Island. And his artist, or he, used this pattern and design in quite a few different windows. This is not a copy, but this is just our inspiration of what he had made. And my program has stopped running. I can't advance the slide. One moment. I think Patrick's coming to help me. What's happened?
I don't know what's happened.
There we go. Patrick has helped me. Magic fingers, you can call him from now on. This is another snowball wisteria windows, and a pair of them are fantastic. I don't know who has them. They're about 3 feet by 3 feet, each one of these. This is a smaller pair, a little more intricate in design. When you think of it, it's just crazy, all those little tiny pieces. We were glad to have developed that. Once we got to Michigan and the studios expanded, we had 7 employees. I traced all of the patterns that you're looking at And then we had 2 glass cutters. So I traced them, handed them off to the glass cutters. They finished them, handed them off to be ground. Each piece has to be ground on stone to take off the sharp edges. Then the 2 or 3 people wrapping in copper foil each piece. Don't get them mixed up. Keep them in the same number order. These are a pair, but yet different. On the left, you have trumpet vines in the corner. On the right side, you have a red rose, rambling rose in the corner. They do host, each one has 3, 4 Tiffany jewels embedded in the window. And this is the, again, the classic Tiffany wisteria. We made quite a few of them. They are the most popular. The tree base has been cast by Bob, and the scarab down in the picture. Bob studied Egyptology. He loved it. He made scarabs. 18-inch wisteria. We made 20 of these. That means 40,000 pieces. That's why we hired employees. We would be babbling if we tried to do these by ourselves. And as I showed you at the beginning, after the studios closed, we had time to make a lampshade for ourselves. So we made this 26 diameter wisteria for the dining room table. And at Christmas, it gets a little bit of extra adornment. This is me soldering that lampshade. You have to sort of teeter it around on your legs, trying to keep this form. You can only solder where it's flat. So you have to lift it up and let it down. If you solder on the slope, then hot solder balls run down off the shade form into your lap, right on top of your lap. One thing I learned about soldering a shade like this is to get a nice solder bead, you've got to hold your mouth just right. The Bauer-Coble Studios. What an experience. And of course, we discovered glass or iris, and such a thing as Iris Club in between. But it was years later, we cleaned out the basement, and these are our shade forms. So this put the final end to Bauer-Coble Studios. Nobody could request, we didn't have to turn them down anymore when they said, oh, please make us one more. We got rid of what you had to have to make starting a shade. So, and Bob didn't want anybody to take our shade forms and start making reproductions of our shades. They had to learn how to do it from, like we did. We were self-taught in everything, how to make shade forms. Bob figured out everything. But maybe somebody out there can look at this and get an idea and go on and make their own and start up their own business. (1987). I'm wearing a bullseye t-shirt still. We went to Portland, Oregon, 1980. Glass factories there, bought sheets of crates of glass, had them shipped back. And then probably a first vacation ever, rented a car and went down to San Diego, California from Portland, Oregon. And yes, we went to Highway 1 along the coast in California, stopping at all the blown glass studios we could find and buying blown glass. It was 1980 when we discovered such a thing as an Iris Society. Such a thing as a Japanese iris, but we didn't know it. In 1980, of course, our big Victorian house didn't have air conditioning. Most people did not have air conditioning. And the only place to really find air conditioning on July 4th, when it was 90 degrees, was the mall or a movie theater. They were air conditioned. So we went to the mall. And just by chance, they were having an iris show. I mean, now we can say that. We didn't know what they were. We knew they were beautiful, and we were too shy to go up to the table and ask what they were, what this was all about. We just oohed and awed, and I guess just walked on and didn't say too much. But it was a couple years later when one of our artist friends, who was a watercolor artist, and she was going to a garden the next day to paint in a lady's flower garden. And she said, I think you guys might enjoy it. Lots of different flowers and gardens. And we said, okay. It was a nice spring day, probably early June, and we went with her. It just turned out to be the garden of Anna Mae Miller, Siberian Iris Hybridizer, which again, we didn't know what they were. We certainly found out. And Anna Mae also had lots of spurias in bloom at the same time. And well, she saw two young men interested in flowers and said, hey guys, the next iris meeting is at our house. It's a potluck and we have an auction. That's how we got hooked. We went to the auction, bought plants. The rest is history for the next 40 years. Stained glass business closed around 1990 because of recession. There was the oil crisis, and a lot of wealthy people had less money to spend on art and extravagant things. Most of our lampshades all went to either New York, Chicago, Houston. And some of those in Houston went on to Beverly Hills. But as people stopped buying more shades, we had more time to spend in the garden. And that's, for 10 years, there was an overlap between stained glass and iris gardening. But we did most of the stained glass then in wintertime and gardening in the summer. And then built up the gardens, and we started with 1985. And I'll go on from there with Ensata.